Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is Angela Denker. Angela is the author of Red State Christians, Understanding the Voters Who Elected Donald Trump. She's a Lutheran pastor and veteran journalist who has written for Sports Illustrated, The Washington Post, Christian Century, and Christianity Today. She's pastored congregations in Las Vegas, Chicago, Orange County, California, Minneapolis, and rural Minnesota. To write Red State Christians, Angela spent 2018 traveling across America to interview Christians and Christian leaders in red states and counties. While spending time with the people in her book and her own loved ones living in red states and counties, she found surprise, warning, opportunity, and hope. In retelling these stories, she hopes to build empathy and dialogue without shying away from telling hard truths about the politicization of religion and the prevalence of Christian nationalism in churches across America. So Angela, it's really great to have you with us here today. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
So maybe you can start by talking a little bit about how the pandemic has affected you and what your thoughts are about it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting listening to you read my bio and where I talk about the politicization of religion. And of course, we haven't seen religion and politicization impact how America is responding to the coronavirus at all, right?
No, not at all.
So I think it's really been interesting to just track my own personal experiences through this pandemic and also to track the church more broadly, the American church's experience, and then my own little church that I serve. I'm the 3/4 time solo pastor of a little church called Grace, about 55 miles west of Minneapolis in farm country here in Minnesota. So I've kind of experienced the pandemic on all those levels, whereas looking at sort of the broader impact on the American church, the impact on me personally as a mom of little ones who I'm doing school at home with, and as a writer and a speaker who's having to find new ways to communicate with conferences being canceled and find new ways to share about my book while not being able to be together with people in a physical space. And then also navigating it as a pastor. And I remember back in March when all this started happening, at the end of March, where it was really that first week where everything really shut down, and all of us churches had to move services entirely online, and that was, I remember, such a momentous decision, but also at a time where I think I just had to tell myself that okay, well, we're going to be back for Easter, at that time, like there's no way I couldn't even think about doing Holy Week online. I just had to get through that first week. And I remember that first live stream service. I've been doing it through Facebook Live right here in this little room with my 7-year-old son sitting next to me for most of the service. And he's been helping to do some of the readings and just to have somebody else to lead worship with. But that first service, it felt so encouraging. It felt so inspiring. I saw so many of my church members, many of them who are rural people, many of them who are elderly people, and they, changed things around and figured out how to get on Facebook, how to watch the service, how to be present together. And it just felt like, okay, the Holy Spirit is here with us. We're going to get through this. That following week, I did an interview for NPR with a Muslim imam and a Jewish rabbi. And I remember just in all of us speaking about what was happening for us in the pandemic, there was a lot of fear and there was a lot of anxiety, but there was also a lot of hope, in the ways that, okay, we're moving things online, we're reaching out to people. I remember there was some excitement in my neck of the woods in rural Minnesota about this church that was talking about how they were going to do a drive-through service and they were going to try and have one of the stations be like a way to collect food. And then a few days later, all of us ministers who don't have a lot of medical training just kind of get walloped on the side of the head like, hey, drive-in's not a good idea either, you guys. You can't be handing out communion through the car. Like it's just, I think it took a very long time to really grasp the severity of what was going to happen and the length of how long this was going to go on. So I'm feeling that as a parent, with just my 4-year-old son, if he sees people hugging on TV or something, he'll be like, oh, coronavirus, and just the ways that this is really shaping his view of the world. And the way that it's shaping me as a pastor, it's really challenging us as pastors to really weigh that. For me, I have a strong faith. I have a strong sense that, God can work miracles. God can bring protection. And balancing that strong sense of faith with also this sense of responsibility that God gives us as ministry leaders to not put our people in danger. And then, put God to the test by saying, okay, I'm going to have a worship service, and God, you protect the people from this virus, So, and then to kind of go back to what I was saying about the politicization of all of this, we are not having this conversation about the pandemic in a vacuum. We are having this conversation about pandemic in the midst of an America that remains incredibly polarized. So that wearing a mask has become not only a statement about health, but it's sort of become a political statement that says something about where you stand politically. And I see that, not only in rural America, but I see it in urban areas. I see it in the suburbs. And that feels like there's so much talk, and it's hard to find the truth in the midst of it. When we say worship services are essential, I think all ministry leaders have always believed that. But it becomes into a partisan battle when, there's a lot of empty statements being thrown around, and meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of people are dying.
Crazy times, isn't it? There's a lot of us who would not have thought that a lot of this was possible. So,
Yeah.
One of the things that, you seem to accomplish in your book is to be able to tell both sides of the story and have some civil discourse about, some of these different issues. Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel? It's been getting worse, right? The polarization has been getting worse for several years. Do you see a way that it might possibly turn around? And if so, how?
I think it really ebbs and flows. And one of the difficult parts too with the pandemic is that one of the places that really hastens that polarization is social media. That one of the few places that people are having political conversations tends to happen on social media. And now with the pandemic, we've eliminated these face-to-face conversations that people might be able to have, so that so much conversation is only happening online. And it's very easy to block someone online. It's very easy to unfriend someone online and to cut off the relationship. So I think that has made discourse more difficult. But I also noticed, if we can remember pre-COVID and what our news stories were about, I noticed, in a lot of my travels shortly after my book came out and during the summer of 2019, I sensed that there was an opening. I spent a lot of time in rural Wisconsin. I spent a lot of time also in North Carolina. And I sensed that there was an opening in a lot of red states and counties for people really wanting to have discussions and critical discussions about what the presidency of Donald Trump had meant for Christians in a really authentic way. And what I also sensed is that after impeachment happened, that there was a hardening again. And it became more difficult again to have those conversations because there was a wall of defensive-ness that came up. And so I think what I've noticed during Trump's presidency is that the number of people that are very strongly committed and have a really hard time having open discussion without feeling defensive, I think that number has gone up. But at the same time, I always see sources of hope, and I think hope comes from refusing to allow one another to be defined by the boxes that we check, and being willing to really learn about one another as individuals. And this is particularly incumbent, I think, on white Christians in America, that the presidency of Donald Trump, the polarization of America, in many ways, it's our story as white people. And so we need to have discussions with one another and talk to one another and not ask our brothers and sisters of color to do the heavy lifting on some of these issues. So I think the hope comes in when we refuse to let the stereotypes tell us stories. I know I carry stereotypes all the time, and serving in rural America and living in an urban city in Minneapolis, I think that I've had stereotypes about, what people who live in rural America might think about issues, and I'm constantly surprised and challenged. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to really listen first and attempt to understand one another with grace, which is something that is just sorely missing from our political discourse and our discourse in general in America right now.
I mean, if you kind of go back to the fundamentals of the Bible, the fundamentals that Jesus taught us, do you think that there's a way to bring those more to the forefront so that people can act that way like he suggested? I mean, what a concept. Do you think there's any hope for that?
Yeah, the people that give me a lot of hope in the church, and that have kind of encouraged me as I've moved from growing up in Lutheran circles and then spending more time in evangelical circles, working as a sports writer, and then moving back into the Lutheran world. The people that have given me the most hope are people who've really challenged us as Christians to look at Jesus' life, at what Jesus actually said, and to return over and over and over again to Jesus. And so much of the defense of the American church, the defense of American Christianity and what that means, has very little to do with Jesus. And we've Americanized Jesus. We've made Jesus a representative of America rather than understanding Jesus as a first century Jewish man who lived in what is today Palestine. So I think returning to who Jesus was, how Jesus asked us to treat one another, stories like Matthew 25, stories like Jesus the Good Shepherd, who goes and leaves the 99 sheep to go and find that one sheep who's wandered away. That story has weighed heavily on me in this time of coronavirus, when we've sort of been challenged to say, well, for the economy, maybe it would be better if we let more people die. And Jesus really lifts up, and really the entire witness of the Bible lifts up, that we are to hold life to be sacred. And this idea of sanctity of life, an idea that Christians and the Christian right has really wanted to own for a long time in American discourse. Well, what does that mean in this time of coronavirus? And how have Christians been focused on defending life in the time of coronavirus? I think that we've, in too many cases, not been focused on that, and been focused on too many other things that have much more to do with the business of church.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about something that I haven't had a conversation like this with hardly anybody else, but because you also have a sports background, have you seen analogies in people's attitude that come from my team versus your team? Sports is so predominant within the American culture. And, I'm going to root for my team no matter what. I just feel as though there are some people that act that way about, politics and right and wrong or whatever.
Yeah.
Did you, in your research, sense much of that?
Yeah, and a lot of it goes back to this idea of life in American life as a zero-sum game, which Trump really championed in his campaign. This sense that you're not winning unless somebody else is losing. So I think that it does have a lot to do with that sort of mentality, and a lot of the people that he was speaking to are people that rightfully, in a lot of ways, people living in rural America, people who are less economically advantaged, less educationally advantaged, have felt like they're losing for a long time. And Trump wanted to say, I can help you win, and that's going to mean other people have to lose. And so I do think it has a lot to do with the language of a zero-sum game. When I thought you were going to ask me about how I'm surviving in coronavirus without sports, because I'm suffering greatly.
Yeah, well, that we all have in common.
And, from my son's Little League all the way up to Major League Baseball opener and all that. And I think that what I learned as a sports writer and why I loved being a sports writer so much is that American sports often offer us a microcosm of America in general. So I think there is something to what you're saying about thinking about political teams. But I also think that there's another side to the story of sports when you look at the story of the synergy that can happen on a team and the ways that sports has in some ways offered a meritocracy or a way for people to come together who would never have come together otherwise, and people to be united for a team who share nothing else in common, right? I'm a Blue Jays is a bad example, they're Canadian. But I'm a Yankees fan, you're a Yankees fan, we have nothing in common, but here we're going to cheer for our team together. So I think sports has offered an opportunity to come together. But sports, like so much else of American life, has been politicized. And when I say politicized, I mean that sports have become a referendum on where you stand on a whole lot of other issues. Looking at the NFL in particular, the ways in which NFL owners tend to be white, tend to be conservative, NFL players tend to be African American, tend to not be as conservative. And there's a real divide between how NFL players view issues and how NFL owners view issues. And there's a lot of racism inherent in the ways that our professional sports leagues are structured and who really holds the money and the power in those leagues. So sports is a venue where I think we can have important conversations about justice. And I think it's been really inspiring to see athletes seek to use their platforms to speak about justice. But then a lot of times they have to pay. So we'll see post-coronavirus, like what our sports leagues look like. I'm really hopeful to begin to see some justice-oriented reforms happening in college athletics, where, college basketball, college football players who have been profited off of by universities, by coaches, by administrators, are finally going to have an opportunity to share in some of those profits. So sports offers a plethora of examples of stories you want to tell, and I could talk about it for a while, as you can tell.
Sure. Well, why don't we switch gears a little bit, and if you want to talk a little bit about how God supported you in challenging times in your past, and how you see that reflected now.
Yeah, one of the things that was just making me so sad throughout this coronavirus pandemic was thinking about high school seniors and college seniors and just what this does as they graduate, and that, thinking about back to my high school, they're not going to get to go to prom. They're not going to get to have a graduation and wear that cap and gown and switch it to the other side and have a grad party and these rites of American passage that have been irreparably changed for them. And we have some graduating high school seniors at my church, and just, seeing, even when I do like Zoom confirmation with my middle school kids, just seeing sort of students feeling sort of crushed by all this and not really sure how to process what's happening. So I was doing a lot of thinking about that. And then it also led me to think about my own experience in college, and that at the time when most of my peers were graduating from college, I had graduated a semester early. So while they were going through these big graduation ceremonies, I was covering a minor league hockey team in Dayton, Ohio, in this crappy hotel, and I graduated in December 2006. So coming out of college with a journalism degree at a time when newspapers were in free fall, and so the newspaper that I was slated to go work at, the Kansas City Star, they went into a hiring freeze. I didn't get hired there, so I was, stringing for them for months, trying to just wait it out. And then I got a job opportunity in Florida, so I ended up moving to Florida on my own at age 21, covering this hockey team, never having had covered hockey before, replaced a much older man who'd been their beat writer for a number of years. When I first walked into the locker room, they didn't want to let me in. They had to have a team meeting about if I could be in the locker room to do interviews or not. So just kind of reminded me that, nobody has the perfect idyllic experience, and really the formative experiences in my life that have shaped me, that have given me resilience to keep going, are those times that have looked less than ideal. So it doesn't mean it's any less painful what we're all going through in this country, but I think that it reminded me the ways that God had carried me through those times, by giving me this opportunity to be a sports journalist in Florida at a really important time in the hockey world at that time too. And even following my pastoral career, I came into ministry with a sense that I would want to work globally overseas. I was looking into learning Arabic. Instead, I got married. I had a baby. We moved to San Francisco. We moved to Chicago. We moved to Orange County, California. And then I kind of thought, okay, I want to be the first female pastor of a really large evangelical megachurch, basically. And so I worked at this very large church in Orange County, and with an older male pastor who really shared leadership, preached Christmas Eve, preached Easter, but also got sort of a peek behind the curtain of what that would look like, and really felt God calling me, after the election of 2016, when I was serving in this church, to a more public witness, talking about politics and theology and Christianity. And that's not, I figured out that's something that you can't really do when you're pastoring a really large church. To have that public witness is just a hard thing to balance. So then I came up here to Minnesota, worked on writing my book, worked part-time in sort of a teaching pastor role, again at a large multi-site congregation, and eventually came to this small rural church where I never thought that I would be, but where God has just inspired me and filled me with new excitement for being a pastor in this place with people who really want to worship. And so many people have ideas about what rural America looks like, and I've been really challenged by that in my experience at this church. So that's keeping me going. I know it's been hard for all of us, and your hope is challenged each and every day. And I haven't even had to confront people in my church having COVID yet. It feels like it's getting closer, especially for those of us in rural America and the Midwest. It feels like it's getting closer all the time. But God is also getting closer all the time.
Well, what a rich set of experiences that you've had, and the nice thing to hear is how much you've learned from them. It's like when we are challenged, we do go through difficult times, that's the time that we learn the most.
Yeah, and it's very theological. That's the cross, very Lutheran. So it's, yeah.
Resurrection takes a lot of forms, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
So what kinds of resources would you recommend for people, to help get through the rest of this crazy time that we're in?
Yeah, so I would really like to recommend all sorts. There are so many resources, and I think that was one of the hard parts about the early days of the pandemic, is it was like, especially as church leaders, I think we were overdoing it on resources. Like we were just throwing everything out there, and I'd see some churches that were just, it was like they were live on Instagram Live or Facebook Live 24/7, because people just didn't know what to do. But I would really encourage pastors to use social media to the best of your benefit. So my church has really gained a lot of benefit by having a Facebook group for our church. And we can share prayer requests there. We can share videos there. We had one of our kids from the Sunday school group, he put together a couple of videos from our church, just short 2-3 minute videos. One of pictures of people that sent in with their moms, another one we made for Palm Sunday, and one of my members was riding his donkey on a dirt road. So just, finding ways to find humor in the midst of what's going on, I think is really, really important and helpful. I've also, I've been using the free trial of the Peloton app to do yoga.
There you go.
That's been nice, 30 minutes, just kind of, you can do it wherever. And I've been appreciative of, I find that when my body is moving, it enables my mind to sort of slow down and process things. And especially for those of us who are maybe more introverted and you're at home now, maybe with children, maybe with roommates, maybe with a partner, a spouse, and you're like constantly stimulated, finding those ways to step outside your mind can be really important. So we also got like a cheap exercise bike on Amazon, and that's been a huge lifesaver. You can probably tell I'm not a huge daily devotional person. I kind of, the other day, a poem came to my head. It was T.S. Eliot's poem, The Hollow Men. And so I was sort of meditating on that poem for a while. I just kind of have things come to me from time to time. But my friend is a pastor and a writer. Her name's Elizabeth Hagen. And I do get her weekly Sunday devotions. And she just does one word to meditate on. And I found those to be really helpful for me too, as I'm preparing for worship on Sunday mornings.
Very interesting. But the whole diversity of things that people rely on has been really fascinating throughout this entire interview series, because it's just all over the map.
Yeah, and coffee and, a glass of wine or beer or chocolate,
Exactly.
ice cream. I mean, the whole gamut.
Well, you are in Minnesota, eh?
Yeah, exactly. We need it all.
Well, Angela, it's really great to meet you and really great to spend some time together. Thank you so much for doing that and for sharing your thoughts and your insights on this. And I look forward to, working with you further.
Thank you for everything you do and for the platforms and the people you put together. And I am continuing to watch all these videos as well. So thanks for doing this.
Good. It's my pleasure.